So good morning, everyone. My name is John Riley Mamawag from Group 2, and I'm here to present my PowerPoint presentation, which is the key figure of the scientific revolution, Johannes Kepler. Okay. First, let's talk about who is Johannes Kepler. Johannes Kepler was born on 27 December 1571 in Waldestadt, a small town in what is now the Stuttgart region of Germany. He was the fourth child of Heinrich Kepler, a mercenary who left the family when Johannes was only 5 years old and is thought to have died in the 80 Years of War. His mother, Katharina, was an innkeeper's daughter. She did her best to allow Johannes to experience the wonders of nature, and it was probably because of this that he developed a love for astronomy. And it was she who took him to a high place in order for him to see the great comet of 1577. Better, and it was probably that she called him outside in 1580 when he was 9 to look at the lunar eclipse. In 1589, after leaving grammar school, Kepler attended the University of Tübingen and proved himself to be a skillful mathematician. Under Michael Maestlin, the university's professor of mathematics, he learned about planetary motion and became a fan of the Copernican system, which put the sun rather than the earth at the center of the universe. Kepler had wanted to become a minister, having studied both philosophy and theology whilst at university and having attended seminary at Melbourne before that. However, he was recommended as a teacher of mathematics and astronomy at a school in Graz, a position that he took up at age of 23, April 1594. Whilst teaching at Graz, Kepler claimed to have an epiphany on 19 July 1595, in which believed that he was shown God's geometrical plan for the universe. His experiments led him to publish a book called Mysterium Cosmographicum in 1596. A second edition of which was published in 1621 included all of his observations and corrections since the first edition was published some quarter of a century earlier. The year before he published Mysterium Cosmographicum, Kepler was introduced to Barbara Müller, a 20-year-old, twice widowed mother of one, and they began courting. The couple was married on 27 April 1597. They had 2 children who died in infancy, but 3 more children would follow. A daughter called Susanna and 2 sons, Friedrich and Ludwig. Following the publication of Mysterium Cosmographicum, Kepler formulated grand plans to expand on the work by publishing 4 more books dealing with the sun, stars, planets, and their motions, the physical nature of the planets and the effects of the heavens on the earth. In order to help him with this work, he began correspondence with a number of eminent astronomers to whom he had previously sent copies of his book. One such person was Tycho Brahe, who was particularly critical of the use in Kepler's work of the inaccurate data supplied by Copernicus. Nevertheless, the two started regular correspondence. Eventually, and amidst growing religious tension in Graz, which was threatening his employment, Kepler accepted an invitation from Tycho to visit him in Prague. Kepler arrived in Benátky nad Jizerou, about 35 kilometers outside of Prague, where Tycho Brahe was building a new observatory on 4 February 1600s. He met Tycho and his assistant and stayed for the next couple of months as a guest. And as Tycho began to trust Kepler, he allowed him more and more access to his data. Following an argument, however, over negotiations for a more formal arrangement of employment with Tycho, Kepler left and headed to Prague. The pair soon came to an arrangement, though Kepler returned to Graz to collect his family. Political and religious tensions in Graz meant that he could not return immediately to Brahe. But when he refused to convert to Catholicism, he was banished, and he and his family headed to Prague where from 1601. He was supported by Tycho Brahe, but on 24 October 1601, Tycho died unexpectedly. Kepler was appointed his successor as the imperial mathematician with the responsibility to complete Brahe's unfinished work. As the imperial mathematician, Kepler's primary responsibility to Emperor Rudolf II was to provide astrological advice. Kepler had been providing detailed horoscopes to friends and family since his university time, and so this presented no problem for him. The emperor showed an active interest in Kepler's work and, on paper at least, provided an ample income. However, due to troubles the emperor was experiencing at the time, actually getting a hold of enough money to look after his family proved difficulty and was causing problems for him at home. However, this was balanced by the fact that his position at court allowed him to practice his Lutheran religion without hindrance and also provided him with access to other scholars, which allowed his astronomical work to progress quite rapidly. As he also now had unrestricted access to Tycho Brahe's work, he also made leaps and bounds with his work on optics and most of his work actually paused most of his work during 1603 to work exclusively on the subject. That resulted in a manuscript which he presented to Emperor Rudolf on 1 January 1604. The manuscript was published as Astronomy Pars Optica, or the optical part of astronomy, within which it should be noted that Kepler was the first to correctly describe that images are presented to the human eye upside down before being invented by the lens for presentation to the retina. The work is now considered to be the foundation of modern optics. In October of 1604, Kepler began to systematically observe a bright new evening star, or a supernova, which led him to conduct more research into the phenomenon. The research resulted in the publication of Astronomia Nova, within which are published Kepler's first two laws of planetary motion. Kepler then switched his focus back to Rudolphine tables, which was the unfinished work he took over from Tycho Brahe. The tables included specific predictions of planet and star positions, but the work would continue for several more years before it was completed. In 1610, Kepler was contacted by Galileo Galilei, who told him of his observations of four new satellites orbiting Jupiter, essentially to seek confirmation of his observation. This confirmation came enthusiastically from Kepler as he realized the significance of not only Galileo's observation, but the means by which he had been achieved through the use of a relatively new device called telescope. The following year, Kepler published a description of the symmetry of snowflakes and extended discussion to include a statement about the most efficient way to pack spheres, something which came to be known as Kepler conjecture. Conjecture. However, 1611 would mark another significant turn in Kepler's life. Emperor Rudolph's health was failing, and after he was forced to abdicate by his brother Matthias as the king of Bohemia, it became apparent that Kepler's days at court were numbered. During the same time, his wife Barbara became ill with Hungarian spotted fever, and all three of his children contracted smallpox. Friedrich, his 6-year-old son, died, and soon afterward, so did Barbara. Kepler had been offered a post in University of Padua as mathematics professor to replace Galileo, but he wanted to keep his family in Germany. He had arranged for a move to Linz as a teacher and mathematician, but delayed his departure following the death of his wife and son. On the death of the emperor in 1612, Matthias actually reaffirmed Kepler's position at court but allowed him to move to Linz. While in Linz, he published a formal and systematic work on the year of Christ's birth and also wrote a similarly detailed treatise on how to measure volume of containers. The first two was published in 1613 and the later 1615. The same year as the publication of the work on the date of Christ's birth, which was called the Vero Anno, he married a 24-year-old woman called Susanna Reutinger. They had 6 children. Although the first three died in childhood, the next three, Cordula, Friedmar, and Heidelberg, survived. Between 1615 and 1621, Kepler published a three-volume work called Epitome Astronomiae Copernicae, or Epitome of Copernican Astronomy, which contained all three of his laws of planetary motion, with the first two being purposefully extended to cover all the planets, the moon, and the satellites of Jupiter. This would become his most influential work. He also published astronomical calendar in which he would forecast political events, the weather, and planetary positions. This became very popular and helped him to offset the cost of producing his other work. By 1624, though, the calendar started to cause more trouble than they ever were, partly due to the ambiguity of his predictions. The last of his calendars, published in 1624, was publicly burned. During this time, Kepler had to turn some of his efforts in another direction when his mother, Katerina, was accused of witchcraft, and Kepler had devised a successful legal defense, and after 14 months in prison, Katerina was released in October 1621. By 1623, Kepler had finally completed the Rudolphine tables, but they would not be printed until 1627. At Kepler's own expense in the city of Ulm, which was where Kepler and his family had to move to following more religious tension and the Beijing of Linz in 1626. The following years consisted of a lot of travel following the military success of the emperor's forces. He spent time in the imperial court in Prague as well as in Linz and Ulm. Kepler finally moved to Regensburg in the south of Germany, but shortly after arriving there, he fell ill with a fever and he died at the age of 58 on 15 November 1630. He was buried in Regensburg, but a few years after his death, the graveyard was destroyed during a religious conflict and its exact location is now lost. What is scientific revolution? As we know, the scientific revolution is a term used to describe the emergence of modern science that took place throughout the 16th and 17th centuries. Before the scientific revolution, astronomy was closely tied to astrology. Astrology is the belief that the movement of the stars and planets can be interpreted to predict the future. This might sound silly to us, but for thousands of years, this was an unaccepted practice. Johannes Kepler's role in intellectual revolution. You want to know? Johannes Kepler was a leading astronomer of the scientific revolution, known for formulating the laws of planetary motion. An astronomer, of course, is a person who studies the sun, stars, planets, and other aspects of space. Kepler was German and lived between 1571 and 1630. Like many scientists of this time, Kepler also taught mathematics. He served as an assistant to another famous astronomer named Tycho Brahe, and he even provided his expertise to Emperor Rudolf II. Kepler's ideas about astronomy proved to be very influential. His ideas helped influence Isaac Newton and many other leaders of the scientific revolution. And that's all, guys. Thank you for listening, and thank you.